So, first of all, I would like to say that it is an absolute pleasure to be here tonight or this morning for people that are in Brazil, this afternoon for people who are in other places. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is the first time that I'm having the opportunity to work in this online environment, dealing with conscientiological ideas. So this is a new experience for me. But anyway, I think we have the technical support to help us this evening, our helpers. I would like to thank very much for express my gratitude for Mitiku, Fernandes, Jeffrey, and Magali, and all people that are engaged in this project. I think this is a new type of gestation, consciential gestation. So let's see what will be the outcomes of this experiment for us, for everybody who is attending this meeting, because we are spreading the clarification task through this new tool. I had the opportunity to work a few time ago in Brazil with the 700 experiments. So we organized study groups, but we didn't have this international environment and the possibility to record the ideas through the system, through this online system. So this is a new environment for us. So I'm very curious to see how will be the outcomes of these projects in the future. I also would like to say that actually we forgot something I think that is important, perhaps for the next meeting, to include on the website something that we have in all classrooms in the Conscientiology, which is the disbelief principle. So I'd like to say that for you guys that please don't believe in anything that we are saying here at this meeting. Have your own experiments, and try to think critically in terms of your own experiments in order to respect this principle, this main principle of the Conscientiology. Perhaps we could put this online in the future to reinforce this idea of the self-experimentation, which is one of the main ideas that you can discuss tonight or today anyway, in regards of the chapters we are studying at this meeting, at the second course. I also I study some of the chapters. We have 31 chapters and 2 sections for this meeting. And I would like to flag some main ideas. And I'd like to say that this, I don't want to create a kind of classroom, online classroom here, but more a debate, a horizontal debate. So I think everybody, it's, please express your counter views, your arguments in order to create a horizontal debate. This is very healthy for the development of the Conscientiology. I flagged some main ideas, but I'd like everybody raise points, questions, criticisms in regards of these chapters, the Conscientiology, in order to improve our level of arguments. So, for example, we can discuss something in regards of conventional science, the interdisciplinary connections of the projectiology, the clash between the scientific and artistic temperament, methodological approach on conscientiology, or the conscientiological research. The consciential paradigm itself, I think this is one of the main points of these chapters. We can go, we can discuss a little bit more about this, the foundations of the consciential paradigm. Evolutionary revolutions, or consciential revolutions. So we have plenty of ideas today, and much more ideas. Some points raised on the forum. I think we have very rich opinions and questions we could discuss today. So please be free. I think I don't know if Ulisses would like to say some words at this moment, in order to create a better environment for us to handle this meeting.
Hello everybody. I am Ulisses. I'm talking to you from Brazil, Foz do Iguaçu. I'd like to thank you all, and especially Jeffrey, Magali, Michiko, Fernandez. I don't know who else worked to build this work, and it's really a very good opportunity, and I hope this group of study will continue and grow. I really have a very good hope. So, and I'd like also to say that I'm very glad to be here talking together with Tony, my friend. And let's see, I'd like to invite you all to contribute, to talk. I'd like to make questions to you, not only to answer. So let's go ahead. Thank you all. Should we begin? May we begin with our contents? Yes? Well, if you can notice, the chapter number 8, it's about science. Yes? I don't know if you think that in general, in Conscientiology, we used to criticize conventional science. But I found it very interesting because Professor Waldo started talking in this chapter very good qualities about science. So what do you think about that? If you can remember this chapter, it seems like a critic, or Professor Waldo is talking good things about science, good foundations or criticisms. How did you could understand this point in this chapter? Do you remember it? Anybody has any comment?
First of all, Professor Waldo usually says we have two options in human history, and that's one of religion, many centuries ago, and more recently, what we usually call science, or the Newtonian paradigm. I will remember in English. Newtoniano, Cartesiano, physicalista, materialista. The Newtonian physicalist paradigm, and the much less worse, if we have critical thinking, appropriate critical thinking, is science. That's where I find the reasons, for Professor Waldo he started the chapter with many advantages, or elogios. Do help me, Ulisses. Elogios for the science approach. Sorry.
Compliments.
Compliments for science, for the science approach.
Welcome, Jarbas. You are talking from Brazil too. Jarbas is an old friend of us, so welcome everybody once again.
You know, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because we can see even really good conventional scientists struggle with certain things, and we know very well that just because they're scientists doesn't mean that they have an open mind, that they are omni-questioning, that they are open to non-physical realities. And so, although with a great deal of respect, Dr. Vieira notes a lot of the good points of science, we can also see that there is challenges, I suppose, individual and perhaps even collectively, that science as a whole has to confront and overcome. Like even here on point number 24, you know, secondary interests can turn science into a negative and even deadly discipline. And that's the thing. How do we stick to the priority interests? And what are the priority interests for us? I suppose is one question we could ask.
I also would like to say it is important to think the context of this approach, because the 700 Experiments is the first book to, let's say, organize or present the conscientiology as a science or as a body of knowledge. So as an author, I think Professor Vieira had the responsibility to show the difference between the paradigms. So it is important to see that this is a book that presents a new idea, a new approach, a new science. And it is essential to create a distinction between these approaches. But the way he presents his idea is not creating a cut or let's say
like a division, or
yes, a division between one science and another, but another approach, a continuation. There is a continuum, a new revolution from the basis of the sciences. So when we are presenting a new science, it is important to set and make clear these foundations. So I think it's important to approach this first sections of the book from this perspective.
Yes, it's not simple to propose conscientiology as a science. Yes, we have the suffix logi. Yes, logi. It means science. And it's not easy to present our subject as a science. So I remember that I heard Professor Waldo saying that it should be very important to pick the best parts of science, philosophy, and religion, and to avoid the worst part of science, philosophy, and religion. So sometimes it seems that conscientiology is like a mix between philosophy, science, and religion. And I remember when Professor Waldo exposed this kind of task. So he proposed for us to take the best part of those 3 lines, and at the same time to avoid the worst part of those 3 lines. So that's not an easy task. But at first, to propose conscientiology as a science, we may assume what is a science, and of course, there are a lot of foundations that we may use the same foundations as conventional science. And as Tony said, we must know what conscientiology may avoid to have a clear identity. I don't know if this idea is clear. Because when I read this chapter, number 8, it seems that Professor Waldo is clarifying a lot of good points about science. There are a lot of good things. And in the other chapters, he started saying what's not good, things that conscientiology should overcome or avoid. So this point, I find that it's very, very interesting. That at the same time, we should learn with science and avoid other things.
You know, when I read the chapter about science and also theoricity, what I saw is that the way he let clear about how science avoid consciousness, to study consciousness. And then Tony put even a question in the forum that I think was really interesting one. Because, you see, we avoid science, no? We as humans, we avoid difficult things. I think consciousness is a difficult subject to study. And so I see that with the main point of this scientific position here, because when you avoid the most important thing, you know, that is ourself, our consciousness, and also everything that involves us as a human being. And you just stay in the border, that is the physical way, physical body, everything that's a little bit about energy, but not profound things, because it's a difficult subject. I think conscientiology gives enter in a difficult environment, you know, because it faced the problems, consciousness, much more than psychology, you know. It's not only about the process, psychology process, no, it's more than that. multidimensionality, and all these difficult subjects.
Hi guys, I would like to contribute as well. I think the conscientiology, one of the key points, because the object of the study is your own consciousness, so it's totally different of the traditional scientific paradigm. So that's why it's quite difficult to people understand. You will be your object of your study, so you will study by yourself. Using many advanced tools, parapsychism and bioenergies and lucid projectiology. So yeah, it's a new science.
I think also that what's difficult in also for the conventional science to accept the conscientiology science is because of the subjectivity and objectivity. Because the phenomena that we are experiencing in conscientiology, that we are considering, they are very subjective. And I watched the first class. Ulisses took this question to discuss about subjectivity, because it's impossible to separate this from our experiences. And for me, this is the most difficult thing. And in the chapter 17, Professor Waldo wrote about some techniques, and I put here, these techniques help to be less subjective and more objectives when analyzing our phenomena or experiences. We know, for example, that Freud, at this time that he was researching about unconscious, he had some experiences, but he never could accept this or told this for the science, because he won't be accepted. So I think this is a situation that is difficult for the conventional science to accept in conscientiology.
And there is one thing here, Regina, that most of the people from science that start to talk about parapsychism or something like that was criticized a lot. Even not only criticized, but even, you know, like
marginalize it sometimes.
Yes, because of
yeah.
So,
yeah.
And we in conscientiology, we must to be much more precise, much more scientific, because people they might criticize a lot what we do. And there is this chapter that Professor Waldo put, and also Tony comments in the forum, that the people criticize himself, you know? And so we always gonna have this type of criticism, like we are crazy, we are not scientific, we are, you know, because it's a new thing and people try to avoid it. And,
sometimes we can't prove in a objectively a way, our experiences. For example, when we had a projection, who can prove that our experience is real or not? Only us, only our
yes.
That's
exactly the point I'd like to talk about. The proof. So in the chapter 9, Professor Waldo presents the essential strands of human knowledge. So as Ulisses talked a little bit earlier, Conscientiology use different strands, the best from these strands, from religion, from philosophy, political ideology, the conventional science too, but the Conscientiology proposed a new strand. So this is the biggest difference from my perspective. That is the interdimensional self-experimentation. So when you think about the self-experiment, you have on your own hands the proof, because you are facing this phenomena, facing this interdimensional reality by yourself. You don't need an objective proof anymore. It is another paradigm, because you are the own subject and the researcher at the same time. So I think this is the biggest contribution for science itself. So Conscientiology, it's a way to rethink science itself by using this interdimensional self-experimentation. And I propose a question or an argument in the forum when I mentioned that I don't think it's possible research or study Conscientiology without this self-experimentation, specifically in terms of parapsychism. So I think the parapsychism is the most important tool or resource you can use in order to create and develop Conscientiology. Without parapsychism, it's, in my opinion, impossible do any kind of research, because otherwise we are doing psychology or just medicine or just anthropology or just sociology. We are not approaching the consciousness from a multidimensional point of view. So this sixth point from the chapter 9, the interdimensional self-experimentation, in my opinion, it's one of the most important ideas, a fundamental idea of this debate, of this point you are trying to understand today.
That's interesting, Tony, isn't it? Because, you know, theoretically you can study Conscientiology, theoretically, just read and think and okay. But even then, if you start to try to pay attention, so the encouragement is to try to, for people to try to pay attention, because even in just doing that, you can start to feel things and start to have perceptions, and you start to expand your awareness of that interdimensional processes, right? So the self-experimentation, as you're saying, it's absolutely fundamental. And I'm trying to do is invite those people who see these videos in the future to just experiment and see and engage a little bit in the process and see if they get proof themselves. Like, speaking for myself, when I started studying Conscientiology, it was theoretical. But the first energy exercise I did, I felt energy. The first clairvoyance session we did, I saw faces and energies and what's going on. So it became interdimensional very quickly. But at first it can be a theoretical thing. And you know, many people who might see these videos in the future, they're not going to be in a classroom where they have those exercises available to them. So I suppose the invitation is look up how to do the vibrational state online, the VS. You know, look for ways to start to seek those more subtle perceptions and correlations between what you do with your will, with your energies, and what you're perceiving and can feel. And then everything just opens up, right? Like as we know, as we've been trying to do these things for years, we have that self-proof and that self-evidence through our self-experimentation. So yeah, I really agree with you. And I just wanted to try to emphasize that invitation to whoever sees these videos in 10 years time or whatever.
So just to be clear, I have a question for you. Do you think it's possible any kind of Conscientiology without self-experimentation? Just to be clear, is it possible?
I don't think anything in life is possible without self-experimentation. I think life is just one big experiment. So
yes, so interdimensional self-experimentation is not an additional point written here. It's essential. So it is conscientiology. So I agree that that's an essential point. If we take this point out, it's not conscientiology.
yeah, and then the challenge is to not be superficial in that, to not escape from that experiential process, because we know people can study conscientiology and be involved even for a long time, but that doesn't mean they integrate the learnings and go deep in the learnings that interdimensional self-experimentation can provide.
Yeah, that's it. One thing I was thinking here, can you hear me better now?
Okay.
Hey, can you hear me?
Is better. Better.
So one thing is that I feel that way. Sometimes I'm just in the comfort zone, you know? Seems that we are learners and we are in the control flow of all these ideas. So what happens is that even in the physical world, many people thinking about intraphysical. So I think I have to be much more organized now. Now that I'm reading 700, I'm starting to be more motivated to be more organized with my experiments, you know? How many times do I write my experience? Oh, sorry. Jeff is helping me because I'm not having technical problem. I hope you now can hear me better. So what I feel from reading these chapters is that I need to organize myself better to bring a little bit more of scientific side from conscientiology, you know, in my practice. And I realized that we are in a control flow, so we need to be more scientific and more organized and experiment more. That's what I want to contribute here.
Magali, I'd like to contribute, suggest another idea related to your point. When you see be more. So we can think about the meaning of the self-experimentation, because when we speak about self-experimentation in conscientiology, it means not just experience phenomena. It means do self-experimentation means self-research. So face yourself. So if you
self-responsibility, this is the problem, because I'm sorry to interrupt, Tony, you can go on. But this, I think, when we are researching ourselves deeper and experiencing more parapsychism, it means that we need to be more responsible for ourselves. So this is.
Yes. So the conscientiology invites us to be more responsible and avoid the self-corruption. So this is the self-experiment too, not only the projection, the out-of-body experience, the clairvoyance, you know, it's about maturity, it's about self-evolution. So the self-experiment, it's a shock for the consciential paradigm, because let's take this, for example, this is an object, is a physical object. I can study, I can research this. I'm not this object, but when I do this with myself, it's completely different. I need to face my good and bad things. my negative thoughts, my anti-cosmetical behaviors. So it's completely different, and not it's not common to see scientists willing to do this with themselves. So conscientiology is an invitation of reframe the foundations of our own consciousness. This is the basis of the consciential paradigm. So this invitation is a shock for the most scientific approach, because the people are familiar with doing research with these objects, these physical objects, but not with themselves. So the self-corruption, I think it's one of the biggest obstacles for the development of the conscientiology, because there are a lot of people with great capability, intelligence, knowledge everywhere, but if they have the self-corruption, you can go ahead with the development of the conscientiology. So I think our task, Ulisses is doing a great job in terms of create a dialogue, a bridge between the conscientiology and the contact with universities, research centers everywhere, because there are a lot of people that are looking for this, the opportunity of understand a little bit more about ourselves and change our own reality. And we have the responsibility, as you said, Regina, not only to change ourselves, but to get in contact with our peers, with our friends from other fields. So assistentiality is another basic foundation or another essential feature of conscientiology.
And Tony, our friends from our fields and our lives.
I don't know, but maybe some scientists, unconventional as I am, I guess, maybe they are in conflict because they have, I think they have some experiences that they can't explain, some subjective or phenomena. I think they have, but they can't explain this. They can't put this for the media because they should be not accepted more in this the context that they are researching. Né? I think it should be, because this is a phenomena that all of us happens, our psychism less or more, but we deal with this, all of us. Né? I don't know, in this way that you said, Tony, that we can maybe, and Ulisses are doing this very well, né? Is doing this very well, that it's important to tell about this science or these experiences that people maybe are getting more comfortable with this kind of researches.
I agree. I agree with what you said, Regina. And I think it's interesting because here in the university in Adelaide, actually, I'm not sure if it's Adelaide or one of the universities here in Australia, they're starting to incorporate some of these ideas into the curriculum. So I know that as part of the psychology department, there was one student that did a study for his PhD on lucid dreaming, for example. You know, so I think we're starting to see a little bit more participation in the scientific field of ideas that, you know, before would never have even been considered. in the academic or scientific field. So yeah, it's interesting.
What else? Anybody would like to raise another point, question in regard this issue, or would like to raise another point? We have a lot of ideas in these chapters.
Hi, Tony. It's Silvana here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can
Okay.
hear, but I can't see.
I hear you.
Okay, good. I had experience like talking to people that never heard about conscientiology, and they have like their professional background is scientific, and these people like friends, close friends, and they completely understood when I explained about conscientiology, but they understood because they have some kind of parapsychism, you know. So, and then things make sense for them. They didn't. They are not interested in study conscientiology, but everything I was telling them make sense, completely sense. And from time to time we talk, they ask me questions and they are interested, you know, they didn't deny. But I think because they have some kind of parapsychism, I think should be very hard for a scientist who is, I'm not sure how to say it in English, a casca grossa, and I think should be very hard for people like that. But for other people, they have some kind of parapsychism, they can accept that easier, you know. And if you talk and if you know how to explain, and I think it's possible for them to switch their mind to decide as well, you know, start considering this kind of study.
Yeah. One challenge in that, even if they have parapsychism, which is great and it's an advance and they can have those personal experiences, one challenge they face is to publicly assume that reality and start researching that in a public way and talking about it and integrating their parapsychism into their research and those new understandings of consciousness.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That's where they have a big challenge, right?
Yeah, mainly because their social life, they don't have people who does it, you know, so then it's much more difficult. I think for people like in Brazil that we have conscientiology strong, and we have other, even so, religions that consider this other multidimensional, so people are more open-minded to decide, maybe scientists. And because if they are not, they don't have parapsychism, they might have someone in their family, you know. But here in Australia, I don't know much, but I don't think they would easily accept for in their social life, in their groups, and assume, decide.
Yeah.
Silvana, I would say that it's not something geographical, cultural. I think there is another aspect, important aspect in here. I would say that the most important point of connection for those who are willing to research themselves and understand the conscientiology is just one thing: intermissive course. I think if those guys had the experience to be in a intermissive course, to attend some classes in this intermissive course, it is much easier to make the contacts. I can talk by myself. I study a master's degree here in Australia. I met a lot of people, and talking to people from 74 countries so far that I met, it is possible to see clearly the distinction between those who understand some principles of conscientiology, even if they never get in contact with these ideas, but they understand something like cosmoetics, multidimensionality, universalism, you know, but it's clear that some of them have or experience intermissive course, but others not. So I think the intermissive course is the main point of contact for us to create this international community, regardless of Brazil, Australia, Europe, Africa. So there are intermissivists everywhere. So this tool, for example, is the best opportunity for us to engage people from different countries.
Okay, I have another point, if you can hear me. If we think about a researcher who would like to propose or he would like that other people should have intermissive course, but maybe it's important that the ideas presented should be self-sufficient. So the structure of the presentation of conscientiological ideas should be independent. So we have a very difficult task, that is to find a strong methodology in a way that any presentation should be strong and self-sufficient. Imagine if you have the task to talk about conscientiology to anyone. So you may have a very good structure in your proposal. So that's the challenge of any science. So to be considered a science, conscientiology may find a strong methodology. So to support self-experimentation, we may find a strong methodology. So that's the challenge. As Jeffrey said in the beginning, for anyone to assume publicly any conscientiological idea, it's not difficult, but it's difficult if this person doesn't have good support in terms of methodology. I have the experience to hear different people in international events from conventional science, people who are investigating extra-physical consciousness, and they are looking for good methodologies. And that's amazing. Anyone may look for good methodology. So for people, for conscientiological researchers, if we try to talk about conscientiology without good methodology, maybe that's a mistake. We will try to assume something without good support. So we may try to understand how to give a very good methodological support to self-investigation. I think that that's the point. If you have a good methodology that you may create by yourself, so you may assume it publicly. If you don't have a good methodology, oh, maybe you'll be in trouble. You see, it's in something close to mysticism and other strands that are not conscientiology too. So our problem is very complex. So self-experimentation is maybe the main philosophical strand, maybe. We think so. I agree with that. But if we don't have good support in terms of methodology, we may fail. Do you understand it? It will not be a science. It will be another thing, but not a science. To be considered a science, we need methodology. strong methodology.
Yeah, I want to put another point here because I don't know if I quite understand what type of methodology you're talking about, but one thing I see is that we have several ways to approach our self-research in conscientiology. Like we can approach by Conscientiogram, and then we can search ourselves through. We can approach by like we have the consecutivo with the methodology of life research, and we have different approach to understand conscientiology and put it in practice, like with dynamics, that we can even work with energy, and all these type of things that we are using. Is that what you're talking about, Ulisses, or is something else?
No, 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 I'm not talking about that. You may have any kind of practice in terms of parapsychism, and it may be true to you, but it's not science if you don't have a method. To make science, it's necessary for you to work with a method. And Professor Waldo proposes this very clearly, because in these sections, he proposes a lot of methods. There are at least 3 checklists where he proposes clearly a group of procedures that we may consider as a method. For instance, let me choose here the best chapter that I found. Well, chapter number 31. Here we have Conscientiology and Projectiology research. And Professor Waldo, he could write 18 topics that he considered a good organization for planning your research. That's a method, you see. And to perform those topics, it's not easy. It's really not easy.
Just a question, Ulisses. Just sorry, I will interrupt you. I just want to know if by methodology you're saying about, like, I used to have a sheet with, I don't know how to say, a form with everything to projections, you know? Every night I let that beside my bed and I could point everything, the temperature, the pressure, the time, the experience I have. Is that a methodology of projection? Is that what you're talking about, or there is more? Because I really want to understand.
Yes, it's a part. Yes, it's a part of it, but it's not enough. It's not enough. It's the beginning. Those are procedures for beginners. To really make science, we should go further. And in those sections, as I could notice here, in this chapter, for instance, number 31, Professor Waldo shows a set of procedures that should be considered altogether. That's very important. There's another point in chapter 9 when he talks about the completeness of conscientiology technique. So it's really a challenge to make science, and it's very important. Conscientiology is proposed as a science, and to make science, I would say that it's not easy. We may work as professionals. You see, to be professional in terms of science is very important. If we don't proceed, if we don't move in this way, maybe we will not show a very good example in terms of conscientiology. To be exemplarist, we may really try to work hard in terms of science, because we are entering another field, in the field of science. You see, to behave like a mystic, like a priest, like a person from religion should be very easy. But to present consciousness in terms of science, it's a challenge. So I would say that we may move towards a kind of professional attitude as scientists. You mean? Do you understand that? I'm not satisfied if I am only writing a few observations about my experiments. It's not enough, you see? So if we want to be scientists, we may consider it as a whole.
Yeah, there is a chapter that I don't remember which one, but is talking about exactly like we do our research, and that begins for our research, and then we research the other person, and then the other person research us, and we research together and exchange ideas. So we get together and we exchange ideas, and that is a kind of start.
Yes. But you see, those are the first steps. A mystical person should do the same, as you said, should do the very same procedures, as you said. Mystical people do the same, as you said. But science is more complex. You see, if you work, for instance, to publish articles, and if you receive reports, articles, texts from other people, you will ask other people to be more precise, to clarify how they could say what they are saying, how can they describe more precisely what's going on. So when we used to hear other people about their psychical experiences in general, we want to clarify the point. So everybody wants to hear and to understand in a more clear way what's going on with themselves and with other people. So we are looking for truth. Science is the way to come closer to truth, and it's really not easy. Well, excuse me guys, but that's my way of thinking, because in general, we see that conscientiologists, people who are living together with us, loves to say that we are make science. But if we are working in a very weak way, it's not science. So we must work hard in science about consciousness. I completely agree with Professor Waldo. His effort to write this book and to show the complex methods, I think that that's the way. I don't like to simplify this kind of approach, you see? That's all.
You know, just a last comment about that is that the experience, I would be really happy if I can start to experience more, because I thought that that is the first step here, you know, even the conscientiology, which level of the multidimensional experience can I reach, you know, and maintain.
Ulisses, I think we didn't reach this body of methodology so far in terms of good, strict criteria, because our level of projectability is not so good. So I think we need to improve our parapsychism as a group to put the Magali ideas. I don't remember the chapter she was mentioned, the number, if you guys could help me to find it, but I think this essential methodology is there. But for this idea works in terms of methodology, we need to improve our level of projectability, lucid projectability, and work on this set of procedures.
Yes, but also maybe we can think in another way too. If you consider a simple phenomenon, not a complex phenomenon, I think it should be better to work with a strong methodology to approach simple phenomenon than to approach a complex phenomenon with a weak methodology. So in terms of science, we may study very simple phenomena, the most simple. Our self-experiences should be really very simple, but we need strong methodology to do that. I think that in any kind of science, that's important. So I could understand that the challenge that Professor Waldo proposes with this book, 700 Experiments, that's for us to really understand how it is important to consider consciousness research as something complex. It's a challenge.
Can you give an example of this methodology you're talking about, just to clarify more, because I understood the idea, but what's this type of methodology?
I can read some topics here in this chapter, number 31. It's very important for you to clarify what is your problem of research. If you don't know what is your problem, you are researching nothing. Second, you may prepare some kinds of hypotheses, consider variables, define your instruments of research, and all those topics. If you are writing a kind of research project, you should write down, for instance, and you should go ahead, okay? Look for foundation, all other writings, bibliography, things like that, okay? This is a kind of example. In general, sometimes we see the papers where people are not careful to write down those topics and clarifying how they could organize the research. So the research organization is very important to make science. It's very simple, but you have a kind of script to follow. That's it. When I talk in terms of methodology, I'm simply repeating what Professor Waldo wrote here down in this chapter, for instance, you see? And also, to make science, it's very important for us to refute something, to move against an old idea. That's very important. So what are we trying to move against? You see, what are we trying to change? What is the new idea to be in the place of the old idea? So that's the core of science, to make knowledge something relative, something that changes. We may put it clear, what are we changing? What kind of news conscientiology brings, you see? If we are only repeating the same ideas, repeating, it's not a scientific procedure, you see?
Yeah.
Even for ourselves.
No,
Those are very basic. Yes. Please, go ahead.
No, I just want to comment that now it's clear what you're saying. At least for me, it's clear now that it makes science is not just experience something, but is going beyond that. Is making new research about that and bring new things about that, and understand what you are searching there, what you are doing, and how you're doing, and why you're doing, and what you want to achieve and make hypotheses about that. Now I understand,
Yes.
because it's not only try to project yourself, but also try to go beyond that, make the experience and formulate hypotheses and go there and see what you say. Now I understand more what you're
Yes,
saying.
and you see, right now I consider maybe the most difficult challenge. How can I say to myself and to other people that my self-experimentation is true? You see? So I may find arguments, I may find new categories of descriptions, I may find new categories of phenomena, really to put all those things together to give support to my report on self-experimentation. So self-experimentation, as a premise, it's philosophical. We have a challenge to make it a concrete step in terms of science. Hi guys.
Conscientiology, I think I agree with you now that in conscientiology we are, at least as I don't talk about Professor Waldo, but we are immature in science way, but we are in this phase of experience, and I can see that it's more about experience things now, and like doing like dynamics, trying to project, trying to do those things, but not going to the science way.
Yes, for instance, how could you be sure that you are not understanding your experience in a wrong way? How can you say that? See, I consider that a kind of methodological problem in conscientiology. We should try to move towards this problem and declare and really to face this problem and to write about it, to discuss about it. So I can make mistakes about the understanding on my self-experience. This may be the core on self-experimentation.
We may have a tendency to, well, I think humanity does, right, to the path of least effort, you know, or the law of least effort kind of a thing. And so if you look at us conscientiology consciousness researchers, it's very easy to just tell people, you know, oh, I had this experience, I had that experience, and so on. And that's okay, that's fine. So maybe we're in that phase, and that's what we need to get confidence in relation to. But to develop the scientific rigor and the expertise and the skills that Ulisses is talking about, that's a whole nother challenge, and that I'm interested in, I'm curious about. But how do we do that? You know, like I know there's plenty of techniques and some books and so on, but you know, like there's a lot of stuff that I'm personally not across, like statistical methods and how do you show that those things are valid and this and that, and or relatively valid, you know. So it's a process that I think is really important. But I don't know how do we transition, how do we move into those kinds of things more.
Yeah, definitely this raises a very interesting point. And one of the chapters that we see forward is like devices to be invented. So maybe, yeah, of course, as a science, we are progressing, yeah. And at some point, we're gonna get to a stage where we have a device, and for example, we can measure when you apply energy on an object, for example, you can measure the effectiveness of the energy of the object, or you can have a high level of projection and somehow use those devices to to interact, but I see it's as a long road to go over. Yeah.
I would like to propose a scenario just to create a kind of example. Let's imagine if I have an astrophysical experience, I go to an astrophysical community and see some kind of parafact there, for example. And I return to my body, to my brain, and write down this experience. So this is my interpretation for that parafact. But if we all together go to that astrophysical community and observe together that astrophysical phenomena and share our experience astrophysically at that moment with our parabrains and make a meeting there and return to our bodies and write down this experience together and share our experience and compare and check the difference. Perhaps we have a method or a kind of technique to reduce the level of misunderstanding of that astrophysical parafact. So I think conscientiology is something that you experience by yourself. But if you need something more concrete, something more objective, we need engage more people, more consciousness, not only interphysical researchers, but astrophysical researchers too, because we are working on a multidimensional paradigm. So we not only have a interphysical team of researchers, we have a astrophysical team too. So we are really dealing with a very complex environment.
Yes, that's it. Now I'm thinking about what kind of problem would we search, you know, and what type of questions, because here we, what I understood is now seems that the question is, let's suppose that is about projectability. We could raise questions, is it possible to meet someone, some friends outside the body? Is that possible? So we would do the experiment till we got it several times and then it bring our results. Or is possible to do that outside the body? And that's kind of research could bring us more clarified things, and we could go beyond that. I don't know, it's just an idea.
That's a very good way. As Tony said, maybe we should need only 3 people. With 3 people, that should be a very good design for a project, you see. 3 people could do a lot of good things together and reports and things like that. But in the same way, it's a challenge for 1 person alone. We should improve our descriptions, our categories of communication. So I think that in terms of a group research or individual research, we have the same problem. We may improve our methodology, our method to make science in this way. But I agree, I completely agree with Tony. This kind of, if we work with people together, especially with people who don't agree with us, if we work with people who don't agree with us, science should be stronger. You see, the results should be much better. If we work only with those people who agree with us, the results should be weak.
So this is the reason that we need to welcome everybody.
Yes, that's it. So what else? Any other point? Any other discussion? Should we change our subject? What do you have to say?
I
What do you
think
think right
Fabio
now?
would like to talk to us.
We cannot hear you, Fábio.
Can you hear me now? Flávio, I'm talking from Rio Grande do Sul, and in my experience about the Sul, the first chapter of our book in the Penta research book in Porto Alegre, and about the methodology, and I agree with Ulisses when he talking about the importance of methodology for research groups. And in the Penta practice, all day we have an experiment about Penta. And if you have write notes about our practice, our experience, and after that we catalogate this and discuss in group. Today I have the Invisible College of Pentology, and discussing group that idea. But it's difficult when we have only agreed opinions, and we have don't have a discussion, and we have a methodology to read all the papers, in conscientiological papers about this issue. But if you don't have discussion, and we only repeat what the Waldo say about this issue. And it's a challenge for us and to improve more methodology in our researches. And when I read the 700 experience, these chapters, we say, I have a lot of ideas to say to group, a visible college, about how make a more strong methodology for our discussions. It's not easy for me. It's a very difficult task to do.
I just would like to say that we have 10 minutes, okay? So I would like to suggest for everybody to write down these ideas, use the forum as another environment to continue this debate. And I would like to ask you if you guys have another point or aspect or chapter or question, because we have a few minutes to finish this meeting.
Hi. Well, guys, I like to bring out some interesting topic that Tony discussed on the forum. If the conscientiology is against with art, I'd like to discuss about your opinion, because I believe it's take part of the evolution. Art is a way to express our feeling, our thoughts. I know there is some limits, but I think art is the part of evolution and constant evolution. What's your opinion about you guys?
João, you said about art. I couldn't hear very well.
Yeah, art in general.
So what do you guys think about the relation between the conscientiology and art? That's the point.
I think art is potentially really positive in terms of creativity, in terms of different forms of communicating, if you look at some of the books that have been produced recently that use more artistic ways of communicating the ideas, such as Charlotte, the singers, the Charlotte, what will we say in English, like the passwords of Charlotte's passwords or something like that, I don't know. And also Cons, you know, the interpretation of the book Our Evolution by a couple of guys involved. It's really interesting, and it also can transcend language. So instead of trying to translate to 150 or 250 or 2,000 languages, images can communicate some things really well. So, you know, I think the problem, or why art is perhaps a little bit polemic sometimes in conscientiology, is because if the person becomes exacerbated, you know, they become too emotional, and that becomes sort of a stigmatized process. But I think it's possible to incorporate that creativity and that innovation and those forms into life, into ourselves, in healthy ways. But it's like, if you're a pure artist, then, you know, you cut off your ear, you do all sorts of crazy stuff. So, you know, like, obviously there's some things to avoid, but in terms of evolution, it's probably inevitable that we develop characteristics that could be considered artistic or whatever. It depends on how you apply those things. And also, like I saw in the forum as well, Tony, you mentioned about using photography of landscapes as a kind of a mental hygiene, and I related to that as well, because it's something that I'm starting to engage more in as well, and I enjoy those kinds of things, and that's slightly artistic in some ways as well, you know. So there are perhaps positive uses for art.
I think, João and Jeffrey, we could put this question from another perspective, which is, do you think it's possible use art as a tool for the clarification task?
You know, I think so. I gave examples of a couple of books that attempt to do the clarification task and are heavily influenced or have used traits that we would consider artistic really strongly. The whole books are almost based on them. So in some ways, yes. Is it going to get the person deep into their self-research or things? No, maybe not, but to talking to people at some levels and in some forms, yeah, I think there's space to do that, to do clarification tasks. But obviously, you know, as we've discussed today, it's an individual process, takes time, takes effort. Reading a book isn't the full answer. It's just another step along the way.
I think
also for to access children, for example, it could be interesting to use arts, draw, for example. We know that there are some books for children in the Conscientiology, and they use it some draws or something like this that can do an approach or a connection with children.
Yep. And even, for example, people overcoming some traumas, adults, like PTSD, like there's research done that drawing and using those types of facilities actually helps the people recover. So there could be all sorts of avenues that could be applicable.
Yeah, and also there is no way of us to live without art. And astrophysical, introphysical, I remember once that Professor Waldo wants to show us astrophysical consciousness, and he drew this consciousness. So it's necessary ability to communication, to science. Even in science, we have to draw a lot. So I think it's important way. The thing is not art, is how do you use art, you know, for what you use it, in which context.
And Magali, even in the Projectiology book, you can see some drawings that shows very well in one picture what is Projectiology, you know.
And a final question in regard to this subject would be, would you use art as a main tool for you to express the clarification task in your existential program? In other words, do you think in your case, in your existential program, do you think art is, in your case, the main tool for you to express the clarification task? So this is a personal question. That's not right or wrong. It's just a reflection to think. It depends of the existential program of each one. But I think it's worthwhile to think about that.
Peraí. Would it be suitable, appropriate? the great questions. And I think somewhat some kind of proportion. You ought to employ artists and artistic approach, neologisms, for instance. It's the art of elaborating phrasal, verbal expression in a new approach, but only art, an artistic approach with those roller coaster, emotional roller coaster, no good.
And just quickly before we wrap up, I mean, I think of infographics, which can be great ways to present clarification and information in a concise way, that have touches of artistic abilities and stuff involved in the creation of those, you know. So is it the main way for me? No, I don't think so. But is it one tool? Yeah, I think so.
Is the website an artistic thing?
In some proportion, for sure.
All right, we have 1 minute to go. From my perspective, it was great to be here. It was a pleasure to be part of this debate. I would like to thank you everybody again for this opportunity. I hope I can see you next time, and I hope you can continue this debate by using the forum. This is an amazing tool, so let's put our ideas there. Please don't be shy. Let's express our opinions. As Ulisses mentioned, we need more refutation to get the scientificity of conscientiology stronger. So the forum, I think is the best way, because you can express, you can write down our ideas, and it is a way to follow and continue this debate.
So,
everybody mute, everybody agree.
Yeah. So
okay,
just
my friends, I'd like to tell you just that I will be together with you the next time as a participant, and I will try to help improve and to go ahead in this project. So it was a very good pleasure to be together with you also. See you next time.